Are you looking for a podcast where you can hear from real people regarding their real dental drama? If so, then you've come to the right place. Join hosts Bethany Petty and Dr. Rena Kuba as we dive into the solutions we've created and the mistakes we've made while managing dental drama. Let's get started.
Okay, so today I want to bring to light a question that we get asked a lot. I get asked, and you recently got asked this from a colleague, which is how many staff members do I need to have on my team? So I think I get asked this question a lot because practice owners genuinely want to know. You know, Sally at the front is telling me that she's overworked, overwhelmed. I feel like it should be enough for one person to manage. At what point do I need to add a second person at the front? Or my RDA says she's drowning. Do I really actually need to hire a second one? And so it really is this vague, like, is there a formula for knowing how many people that you need on the team? For me, from a consulting standpoint, there is a formula involved in it. And mathematically, there's certain markers that I want the practice to get to. But there's also, that's the objective side. So I can look at a practice number and for the most part say either yes or no. You need to add another person or not. Then there's the overhead component to it, which we can talk about in a minute. How much do you have room in the budget to even add that? Or is your one...
But I feel like how's that different from what you just said?
Because if your one, let's say your sweet Sally at the front says she's overwhelmed and needs help, but she is $30 an hour, even though she may actually physically need help, the budget doesn't allow for it because she gets paid $30 an hour.
Up most of the budget.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So those are kind of two formulaic things. But then you and I always kind of go round and round on this subject because you view it very subjectively, which is important. So I will say...
Imagine that. I'm like, what numbers? What are you doing? What are you looking at? She's overwhelmed. What is there to...
She says she needs help. Let's get the woman some help.
Yeah. What formula is there for that?
So I would say that's where, if we can talk about this subject matter, we can certainly talk about all three components. What is the general formula and what is overhead wise, what we need to kind of stay within, and then subjectively, what trumps what? And I think there's going to be times when the subjective actually trumps the other two categories. But we got to be very careful with that, is what I would say. So I think it may be helpful if I start with some of the black and white, and then we can get to some of the fuzzy. How do you feel about that?
Very good. It's all you. The black and white is all you. Take
You're
it away.
Have a lot of thoughts on this.
No, I have no thoughts on it. I might have to take notes, and then I start going, no, that's why you're there. Why do I need to worry my pretty little head off about this? You've got it. We'll worry your pretty little head off about this.
Oh my gosh. So let's start. I think it's helpful to...
I'll try not to snore over here. How's that?
You better stay engaged, woman.
You say the word overhead, and I'm like, night, bye-bye. I don't want to listen to this.
Like somebody's tortured me with this enough. Me.
I know. Somebody's going to tell me, no, I'm not listening to this.
Exactly.
Why am I sticking around for this conversation?
You're like, what do you mean you disagree with hiring this person? What's wrong with you? So I would say for each of the categories, front desk, RDA, hygiene, there's different mile markers that I look for in a practice that I've just seen through there's a lot of data that I won't spit out because I don't want you to snore. So I'm just going to say the basic information.
Smart. Very smart.
So normally one front desk person should be able to manage the practice on his or her own up into about the practice producing usually around $50,000-$60,000 a month. Those are the numbers that I look for. That tends to work across all specialties.
Okay, because that was going to be my next question for you. Okay.
Yeah, it tends to be kind of the magic number. Now, if we've got a very highly proficient, efficient person in that seat, we can sometimes push past that. So I have plenty of practices in my mind right now that they're well beyond that, but they've got one person. But they supplement in ways. So they might have one person that's a front desk person, but they've got an RDA that has some responsibilities that she can support with. It's still the front office that's the front desk or the business admin's her responsibility, but she can at times, if there's extra busy times, she can pull on this person. So she may not be able to get the phone every time, but that second assistant is listening for it. But I would say, in general, most people can handle one front desk person up to 50, 60. And then the math goes again. Once you get up to closer to 100,000 a month in production, normally you need 2 at that point. Once you push past 100, normally it is 3, and I would say very few times, unless it's a very large practice. And when I say large, I'm talking about production of 200, 250 and up. Normally you'll add more after that. But honestly, once you get to 3, most of the practices that I work with, which are usually 1 to 1.5 or 2 doctor practices, can handle it with 3 business admin. And most of the time we never push past that. That's business. We'll get through each of the categories, and then I want to...
So that includes the accounts receivable person.
Correct.
So that includes like the accounts receivable, scheduling, answering phones, making estimates, verifying insurance. That's all.
All of it. Yeah. Okay. Including, phones. Because some people will have asked me, do we outsource phones or anything like that? That's in assuming nothing's being outsourced. It's all held within house. I would say if there are things that we can pull, levers that we can pull, let's say we're getting close to that 50, 60K point and we're worried because it seems like Sally's got a lot on her plate. That's where we either cross-train a few things, or that's when we can choose to outsource a few things to lighten her load so that we're not having to add that second person at 50 to 60K in production. We're like, ugh, I hate to add them now. I'd love to have like a temporary solution to get me until I'm like at 75 or 80. And then it makes more sense at that point to add a second. So there are things that you can do to keep from, as soon as you get to 50, you just add the second person. There's lots of different intermediate steps.
Such as, can you throw out just a couple?
Cross-training and the outsourcing. So outsourcing, you could outsource your receivables, you could outsource your insurance verification, you could outsource phones. Those are the 3 most common things that you can outsource. The last thing that I would recommend outsourcing is phones. Surprisingly, I just have not found a lot of companies that do a great job at that. They do an okay job, but to me, phones are such a critical part of the practice that I don't like outsourcing that. So I would say if you're at that in-between point, then consider insurance verification or accounts receivables / insurance receivables, which could be outsourced. That's business. RDA, it actually follows usually the same formula, except the timeline can sometimes be a little bit shorter with RDA depending upon the specialty. Okay, so let's say a oral surgery, perio practice, they're going to get to that 50K point and they're going to be usually fine with the one RDA. In practices that make their money off of volume, like general, ortho, pedo, those normally, once you get to that 50K point, you cannot make it with one RDA unless there's support, like there's somebody else that can hop in or something like that. But for the most part, the volume, people that need volume, they normally need, once they get up to that 50K point, they're having to add a second at that point, or they're pretty close to adding a second. Specialty can sometimes be fine well beyond that. And then it follows a similar formula to the front desk. So normally we can make it, depending upon the specialty, up to that 50K point. Our general pedo might be a little bit lower than that. General pedo ortho might be a little bit lower than that. And the specialty that adds the most assistance, the fastest, is ortho, because so much of the tangible, actual orthodontics is being done by the assistants. So a lot of times those will add faster than other specialties. Hygiene. Hygiene is a tricky one because there are a lot of offices that want to hire a hygienist too quickly, and it can tank the overhead. And so normally I am pushing offices to wait as long as possible to add a hygienist. And so most of the time practices can get to 60, 70, sometimes even past that without a hygienist, as long as they have an assistant that is proficient at seating the patients, getting x-rays, maybe even polishing, depending upon the state, that varies. So if it's a state that allows assistants to do that, then sometimes we can even push it to that 70K or so before we need to add a hygienist. What I see a lot of practices doing is they'll try to add that hygienist at like 20 or 30K. And then it consumes so much of the budget that it is detrimental to the practice. So we really do.
Would you say unless you're growing very quickly, like unless you need more time for operative and you're booking way out, then?
That's where the subjective comes in.
Okay.
So oftentimes when I step into a practice that's not quite at the point of needing a hygienist, there's a lot of things that we can do with the schedule to run it smarter. The most common mistake I see, especially in general, is what I would say, is that the practice is trying to run treatment and hygiene simultaneously. And so we're ineffective. We're inefficient because we've got our doctor tied up in a crown prep, and then we've got hygiene going. And then by the time she comes out, those hygiene patients have been there too long. It works best to run treatment with treatment, churn and burn, and then get into a hygiene flow. Let's say we do treatment in the morning and hygiene in the afternoon. And you can run that accelerated type hygiene so much more efficiently if it's separated. It's almost like we have two modes. The doctor herself or himself has two modes: treatment mode, hygiene mode. And so it's hard to run them together. Some offices have to run them together up until we are like, ooh, I really wish I could have a hygienist. And I'll always like, wait. Let's look at how we're scheduling and make sure. And then if they're running a super smooth schedule, I'm like, okay, yeah, great, let's do it, because we've pushed it as far as we can. But for the most part, there's room to change. Also, when I say hygiene, I don't mean full-time. So that's the other component. When we talk about adding a front desk or an RDA, most of the time that's a full-time position. With hygiene, it may just mean one day. We've gotten up to that 50K point. We've done everything we can with the schedule. Now we need to add hygiene. Pedo can obviously get along without a hygienist, or they can get along a lot longer without a hygienist than any of the other specialties can. Those are the subjective facts about just mile markers to look at. The other component to it is overhead, which is exactly what you asked about. Why would I say no in certain categories? Well, in general, the payroll category, total payroll, taxes, and everything related to payroll, not including the doctor's pay, should be at a maximum 25%. So that's when we go, okay, man, golly, I could really use a second RDA. The first thing I'm going to ask is, do you know where your overhead percentage is at? Yeah, I'm at 25%. Ugh. Either we have to reduce expenses so that, sorry, I said that wrong. We're at 25% in payroll percentage, but what's your total overhead? All CPAs normally recommend somewhere between a total of 60 to 65% overhead. So if we're way over on that, then the only way to become in alignment is to reduce our expenses or to increase our production collection. That's the only thing that we can do. So either, man, we really could use a second RDA. Okay, great. What are we doing to cut expenses? And then how can we elevate our production as much as possible to create room in the overhead? And there's going to be times that we have to take a leap and hire somebody, and it throws our overhead off, and we have to deal with that. But that's another component that really needs to be considered before we add anybody. So these are the things that when you and I have been potentially not in alignment on hiring somebody, these are all the things that my mind immediately goes to. Yours does not go there. Yours goes 100% to subjective. And I want to talk about some of the situations where we've broken my standards and we have hired on even when the numbers didn't make sense or the mile markers didn't ultimately make sense. We just did that recently in your practice. So anyway, what examples do you feel like you can share where subjective has trumped those other categories?
I mean, it gets to me all the time because I never look at those other categories as too. I'm just like, it'll just work. Like I'm there physically going, I could have seen that sibling and done that same day, but I wasn't able to do it because I didn't have the team members that I needed to do it. So to me, that is all the information I need. And if that's just happening once every now and then, but if it's like every day we've run into this,
Yep.
And of course it's harder for us because in the summer we're always going to run into it, but in April we're never going to run into it. So it is some of that balancing of that. But just for me, I start going, if I'm feeling more often than not that I'm being restricted because I don't have either the physical space or it's my staffing's not right, and I'm just run ragged because I've had to do so much more myself, which I'm like, again, when you think about how it should work, my skill set of the things that only I can do are XYZ, but I'm finding myself now I'm jumping and scaling there. I'm polishing that one. I'm having to do this. I'm having to do that. Well, then my time to do what my skill set is diminishes. Okay, how can I fix that then?
Right.
Does that mean bringing in another doctor? Does that mean bringing in another RDA? Where are we going wrong here? I think the other huge component of what you're saying is, you're saying 3 front desk. Subjectively, I mean, that's assuming all 3 front desk are capable of knowing the nuances of each of those tasks. So, for example, in our office, we have really struggled to find people that have the attention to detail to get insurance verification correct, because in pedo it's harder because some things are you have to know to ask about the primary teeth, and you've got it like it's just a little bit more involved, and maybe it's not, that's just what I've been told, so I don't know. But why then do we have where we've got one person that can figure out the patient portion and is telling the rest of the team? Is that me then being too lean, too not so tough on all the front desk to say, no, all of you need to learn how to do this,
right?
But on the other hand, is that unrealistic to ask for?
Right.
And then the next onion layer is, okay, when I first started the office 12 years ago and I had my pickup front desk people, you the only thing you know how to do is answer the phone, get out of here, because I'm going to pay the same person, to be able to answer the phone and verify insurance and give an estimate. We're not in that boat anymore. So to me, I start going, I hear you when you say the number here adds up to this many people. But to me, that's a lot of assumption and going that those 3 people are well qualified, know what they're doing, can do it consistently, can show up consistently. And now you factor in all of the insurance changes. 20 years ago, 15 years ago, we knew we were getting 2 cleanings a year. We knew that crowns went to basic services. We knew there were just a set of norms that we had. And now the way insurance runs, that is all out the window. Yeah. So you're taking somebody who, if it was an older employee and they knew those norms, that is having to teach an old dog some new tricks. Or you're hiring new people that are getting overwhelmed by the number of things they have to look at and be worried about. So that's where I start going, I hear you on the 3 people, but living it in reality, I've never had 3 people that were extremely proficient that we were able to make it go with that.
Right.
So I started going, am I just looking at the wrong people or what? I don't know. I don't know what to say about that.
Well, and I think some of that is also your specific practice too. So being pedo for one, being the amount of call volume that you guys have. So I think that's an important factor to pay attention to. Also, you run a highly detailed office. Everything is detailed, including all these little documentations that we make on every single phone call that comes in, how we're marking up the appointments and what all the notes need to be on there. There's a lot of documentation weight on every team member, but also on your business team members.
But then I ask you, then how do offices that aren't like, I only know what I know. I only know
Right.
what I do. So if you're telling me other offices that I'm the outlier, then what do these other offices
I
do?
wouldn't say you're the outlier. I would say that there's plenty of offices out there that are pretty nonchalant about, oh, okay, we've got a new patient on the schedule, and all we know is that they're a new patient. We don't have any other details. We're fine with that. We'll figure it out when they get here. Or, hey, you've got people on the schedule that are unconfirmed. Oh, that's okay. It's going to be fine. We don't have to go to any additional steps to confirm those. So there's just going to be certain areas that other practices may be very laid back in several categories, and that balances it all out. Your environment is more, no, we're going to be detailed, and we're going to be detailed on everything. And so that raises the caliber. And that's not that it's wrong. That is the expectations.
So then I just have to pay more for that, I guess, then, because then I need employees that can do that. To me, the alternative would be then, if I'm not, but we're still going to have problems. Either I feel like I have more detail on the front end, so we have a smoother back end, where we're not having, we might have 8 patients calling and saying, hey, you gave me the wrong estimate. Why do I owe money? We don't have 30 calls.
Right.
We don't have 30 claims that aren't getting paid right. We have 8 claims that aren't getting paid right because we did our due diligence on the front end. So we're getting paid sooner.
Right.
Now, of course, I'm assuming all of that. I don't know. You would be the one to know that because you go in and out of all of these other offices. So not to get bogged down in my particular office, but that's what occurs to me from a subjective standpoint. Or if I've got, 3 RDAs and you're telling me, no, you can't afford another one. But then what is the composition of those RDAs? Is one really terrible at chairside? Can one not take x-rays well? Does the other one not know how to take an impression properly? In Texas, you've got to be an assistant for 2 years before you can do sealants and polishing. So you're not there yet. And so now you're hogging up some of the budget without being a fully useful assistant.
Right.
But you're what I could find. So then do I need to supplement that on some days with a part-time assistant who can help us? Or I've got to work a lot harder being more strategic about going, okay, these are the days that you're working, so I can't schedule blah, blah, blah on those days. But on these, all of that to say, that's what we're meaning by me subjectively going and saying, I get on paper that that's that way, but it's not playing out realistically that way in my office.
And to me, then, those first 2 categories, the more black and white categories, simply become a guide so that we know, okay, we're flexing in this category. And at least we know we're heavier staffed at the front, for example, than I would recommend coming into your practice. But that means we need to be lean in other areas. So we're kind of overspending in this category. We just need to be aware of that so that we can be smart in other categories.
And it can't be just we're going to just fluff wherever and it's just going to work out. No, there is a strategy to it. I let you handle the other. And then I've got to justify. And I justify to you first and going, okay, Bethany, you observe in my office. You try to tell me, or we'll take the schedule and I'll say, look, this is what happened. When I looked at the schedule here, this is what happened here. This is what happened here. And this is why we ran into this pinch. And it's not just this one day. This is all the time this is happening. So then we're dialoguing and going, okay, is one of our RDAs not cutting it?
Yeah.
Are they not showing up? Have they not learned whatever we trained on? Or maybe it's our fault for never offering the training. Maybe I need to sit down and coach and work with that person. So it really opens the door to all that. And finally, when we look at all of that, that's when you and I start going, okay, this is the only solution that I see. Mm-hmm. And if you can't come back at me with a different solution, then my solution wins.
Right.
And I would say it's probably, what would you say, 80% you can figure a solution and 20% I'm like, no, I'm getting my way on this because I just don't see that any of that's going to work because of the particular people we have.
Yeah.
These are the skill sets we've got, but this is where I'm trying to go.
Yeah. Well, and for me, from a consulting standpoint, too, there's going to be all these parameters that I have in my mind to know, is this practice reaching the mark or not reaching the mark? And, yes, you and I have dialogued a lot about this, and we can't figure out another solution besides another person. So it points me in the direction of where problem areas might be. But then also, at the end of the day, if it is more stressful for you, my client, to not have a person there because this problem keeps happening, if that's more stressful than the spend, then to me, to be a good consultant, I have to go, my whole theme is practice happy. Like, if you are going to be happier with a person in that seat, then then we've got to go with that, and if we can't solve it any other way, then we've got to go with that. So that is where I feel like most of the time we've been able to figure out a solution, but there's been plenty of times where it's just like, you are going to feel better or more secure, more calm with a day because there's an extra person there. We have to do that. That money is then worth the peace of mind. And I think that's where the subjective really does come into play. And even though it may not make sense mathematically, financially, or according to these milestones, there's going to be times that we just have to flex because it feels better. This has been coming up a lot with employees that are gone a lot. They're absent. And so it's like, no, technically we have 2 RDAs. We need 3, or we technically have 2 RDAs, but one is always gone all the time. So now we need 3 just to cover for the absence of the one. And a common response is, well, shouldn't we just fire the one that's never here? Yeah. But then when that other one comes in and she also misses from time to time, you're in the same boat. So is there any way that you can go ahead and flex, add that 3rd RDA on, and maybe it doesn't make sense mathematically yet, but how can we maximize her? So maybe she's only chairside assisting a couple days out of the week when your flaky one's gone. But then the other 2 days, are there things that we can do? Is there ground marketing that she can get out and do? Can she observe the front so that she can begin to cross-train there? Maybe there's just customer service things that we haven't done before that maybe we should do. Maybe she
Recare retention. Maybe
Yes.
she can get on the phone and handle some of those things.
Maybe she's doing a quality control call with all of our new patients, following up with them with a phone call. How was your visit? Is there anything that we could do to improve? Get creative with it. Yeah, yes, it's adding to the budget, but can you maximize her in a way temporarily that really serves your practice and then also covers for your flaky person's absences?
And maybe they'll make flaky person pull it together and go, oh, there is somebody who could take my seat. And either she sees herself out because she doesn't care, or she pulls it together. Either way, you've cross-trained somebody else to do something productive for the practice. And I think that's kind of where my mindset has always been. And I think my mindset, again, I'm a middle child. I don't like to rely on anybody. I almost didn't get married because I was like, nope, I want to be able to make it on my own. I do not want to depend on anybody. It's me, myself, and I've got this. And I think that's just the way I was brought up, like, because I'm a middle kid. That's the only thing I can think of. So for me, the thought of having to depend on anybody, whether it's my associate, I want my associate to be able to be like, peace, I'm out. I'm done with you. I'm not coming in tomorrow. And me not miss a beat. Bye.
Yeah.
See ya. It's good knowing you, right? I want to be that way with my hygienist. I want to be that way with my RDA. Like, technically, literally speaking, of course, whole different story on the feelings end, but I don't want to depend on anybody. I don't want to be, it's the thing that I said on our very first podcast. I don't want to be held by my balls by anyone. Nobody is going to make me feel like I'm trapped here.
Yeah.
And so for me, if I only have one RDA, I'm trapped because I'm having to count on that person. And my mindset just goes to, what about the day where she turns to me and goes, you need me. I want to make $50 an hour.
Yeah.
And I'm literally trapped. I refuse to find myself in that boat. And so that's why I've always kind of had this paranoia going, I need to have somebody else in the pipeline. I need to have a plan B going. And so I think that's where, for me, I do want to be a little more overstaffed. And I do feel, so I've got two examples we can give here. One is not physically, another person, but on Monday, we happen to have an IV day, and we've got a lot of cases lined up for that day. And before I could even think about it, look at it, we had our manager kind of come in and say, okay, well, it's going to be a long day. And she's looking at the whole week going, okay, if the RDAs start here at 6 a.m. and we don't finish till 4, and then now we've got a whole rest of the week, they're all going to go into overtime. They're all going to be exhausted. So let's be strategic about this. Why don't we have one RDA come in at 6, then she'll take her break at 10, have the other one arrive at 9:30 so they can rotate out, have the front rotate out so nobody's getting exhausted, nobody's going into overtime. it works on paper. So it would work with your formula.
Yeah.
Category A and B, check, check. That's beautiful. But then I come in with my subjective feely, and I'm like, okay, here's the problem with that. I'm in the trench, in the ground. This patient shows up late. That mom has too many questions. This one doesn't understand what we mean by hold gauze on the teeth, right? Like the actual nuances of the day, but I've only got one person in the building now trying to talk to that parent, trying to prep the next one, and we've got to turn around the room in the back, and we've got a full day of this. I'm going to be exhausted by
trying to troubleshoot the whole day because you're missing bodies.
An extra person. Yeah. Or the sterilizer quit working and now we just have the one sterilizer. Well, I don't have anybody to troubleshoot that. Who's processing instruments all day? Yes, I get that one person should be able to do that, but this family came in and the kid ate, which means we're going to push their surgery down a little bit, or now they're hurting where they weren't hurting, and now we're having to extract teeth, but I was planning on using those forceps on the next one, but now you never know what happens in that day, and I just don't like having to work any harder than I have to on a day that's already intense for me. And so the staff kept asking, like, how many cases can we add? How many cases are you comfortable with? And I said, well, I don't know how to answer that question. I could do the dentistry all day long in my sleep. What bogs me down is all the details. Are the chart notes in? Did we get all the x-rays we needed? Did we do our post-op the right way? Well, no, we didn't, because we had one front desk and we had one RDA. And so we kind of got stuck right there because this other family showed up early and this case took longer, but there's only one person to have to deal with 3 families on either end, which means, doc, you have to go in there and go do XYZ, or you didn't get it. So you see what I mean? Yeah. And I'm not running my day that way.
Right.
So I was like, sorry, all of y'all are coming and being there all day. We're all going to put our big girl panties on. We don't do this every day. We're going to make it work this one day.
We'll power through.
So it completely countered the objective, because it didn't take into account the nuances of the day. Or yes, you've got this one front desk person, but they don't know anything clinical.
Right.
So now me or the RDA are going to have to do the post-op. Well, what sense does that make? Like, let's move on with our day. That just slowed us down all day.
Right.
And it's a lot of logistics to think about then. And I want to save my brain power for the dentistry.
Yeah.
So the other
that's a great example.
Another example that you gave, that you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, where we just have done this recently. And so what did you mean by that? Well, if y'all remember, people who've been listening for a while, we had a team member in the summer who gave her notice because she wanted to go work for the school district, because that seemed like that would work out better for her hours. She's got 2 young ones and whatever. So she gave her notice. She'd been with us for 3 years. It was really disappointing, but it was what it was. Wished her well. And then y'all know our front desk imploded, and now we finally seem to be back on track. I hope I'm not jinxing us. Well, said employee has come back now, and the district wasn't what she was anticipating for multiple reasons. And so she wants to come back, but she's still in a pinch with her girls. Like, she's got to be realistic about her hours and all of that. So she came to us and kind of said, could I set my schedule? I want to work from 8 to 3 and I want to be remote. And this is why you should justify.
This is what I can bring to the team.
Yes. And my first thought was, oh, get out of here. No, ma'am. Like, we need somebody in the office. And that was always my bone to pick, was we kind of cherry picked what we wanted to do and what we like to do, but you want the salary of somebody who can do multiple things. And so we went back and forth quite a bit in negotiating, and I was like, nope, I'm not okay with that. Nope, I'm not okay with that. But at the end, so we did hire her. She's starting on Monday. Yeah. Why did I hire her back? The other big piece of that was, from a culture standpoint, am I shooting myself in the foot going, this person can choose to leave, then come back on her own terms?
Right.
Because she was an in-person employee. Now and we start at 7. We end at 4, and she's only going to do 8 to 3. Like, what does she have on you, Kuba, that you're willing to do all of this for her? Mm-hmm. So I had to be mindful of that. Ultimately, in my mind, when I looked at all the pieces, I went, okay, if she's only working said number of hours, then she doesn't qualify for a lot of the extra bonuses like a full-time employee would. Mm-hmm. We're looking at our call rate. Weave lets us see like what our percentage of
what
call.
Our answer rate is.
Yes. And it's not good.
It's not been good for a long time. And we've brought that to the attention of the front desk team many, 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 many times. It seems like an unsolvable problem.
Yes. And so to me, this might be the solution. Well, we have one of our front desk members who kind of went, I feel like I failed you, that you've had to hire another person. And I'm like, that's not the way I view it at all.
Yeah.
I view it as, here's a person who I don't have to train, who is relatively cost effective, who's not physically in my space creating more drama. Hopefully she's from her home, answering her phones and handling stuff like a fairy.
Mm-hmm.
And then that lets the rest of us focus on patient care and getting estimates right, getting insurance verified correctly, and moving on and not getting interrupted by the phone. I've always loved that thought of a call center, but I've never liked it, to your point.
So this is almost like all the benefits of a call center, but it's a person that has spent years with us. Her superpower has always been her phone handling. Like, she's beautiful at it. That was one of our saddest things about her leaving, is that we would lose this superstar that we have on the phone. So it was absolutely something that broke the first and second categories. From a milestone standpoint, we don't need her. From an overhead standpoint, we don't need her. But subjectively, she could step in and solve a problem that we had been trying to solve for many months and could not solve. Not to mention, she's highly proficient at that skill that we needed her to fulfill.
Right. And to argue with you on the overhead part, she's not like bringing in a full
Right.
4-day-a-week person, a full-time person, because she's not going to qualify for this benefit, this bonus. So to me, subjectively, that was a no-brainer, because I've got somebody who is trained, who can come in at times if we need her to. So to me, like, that mentality of mine, like, if one of the other two walked, at least I've got kind of a buffer person-ish, kind of. And because I start going, okay, what if my 3-person front desk, what if 2 of them leave? What if we implode again? At least I've got a backup that I don't have to train. And I like the concept of a backup.
Yeah.
And I think that, to me, to your point, has been well worth it for me financially. I would rather have the mental peace of mind. And to me, then that equals efficiency, which is, again, I really don't like an inefficient setup.
Right.
I like efficiency. I like to move. I like to go. And that requires a little extra manpower sometimes.
Yeah. And it provided some consistency. We do have a member on your front office team that has a lot of absences. And we're constantly we realize that probably has an impact on the call answer rate, as well as other things. But this provides some remote consistency that, if nothing else, even if we've got a team member or 2 absent at the front, at least the phones are stable and we've got this constant person behind the scenes. So that is where, again, subjectively, it makes a lot of sense, and it trumps those other 2 categories in this particular situation. And we're aware that this is now pushing us to an overstaffed category at the front, which means we've got to be tight in other areas. And it's at least something that we know. It doesn't mean it's changing our decision. We allow it to inform other decisions that we might make.
So you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I met with a colleague that's kind of newer in the area, and we were trying to figure out how we could work together, a different subspecialty. And he made the comment about, I've got 1 RDA, but I don't, do I really need another? I don't know. He's a relatively new owner of this practice. And I kind of just was like, dude, I worry about somebody who only has one front desk, 1 RDA, because if that person gets sick, that person gets in a car accident, that person has an attitude problem, you are hosed.
Yeah.
And I just worry about that. So,
yeah, that's why it's nice to get to the point where you can add, and sometimes that may take a leap of financial faith to add. And if you are in the position, which a lot of practices can find themselves in the position where it's just 1 front desk, 1 RDA, you got to build that redundancy in where the front can step in and fulfill some roles in the back if need be, and vice versa. The RDA can cross over to the front and at least survive a day if need be. But it does create a situation where if one of those have to be out, oftentimes you're having to rely on a temp service or something like that. You can't usually function without one person when you've got a team of two. So the sooner you can get to a point where you can add, I agree with you. I feel much better when there's at least one person additional that could float between front and back and be used wherever. That's a much better place to be in, for sure. Thanks for chatting with me about it.
I'm still awake.
You survived.
Thanks for joining the conversation today. We hope that you are comforted in knowing that you are not alone, but we also hope that you're walking away with some really great tips and tricks to try in your practice. We value your feedback, so please take a few moments to rate and review the podcast. Finally, we want to make sure that we're covering the topics that matter to you. So track us down on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let us know what topics you want us to cover. As always, please know that we are rooting for you today as you manage your dental drama.